They were the names everyone, and I mean everyone, expected to see on the top of that podium. But at the 2026 Winter Games, that expectation, it turned into a crushingly heavy burden. We saw absolute legends stumble. We saw heavy hitters finish off the podium in ways that just left commentators completely speechless. So in this explainer, we are going to dissect the daily collapses and, yes, the triumphs of the top-seeded favorites. And stick around because we'll even give you a tool to help you manage the pressure in your own life. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What makes them trip up right at the finish line? So we're going to break down the anatomy of an upset by looking at two very different kinds of outcomes. We'll separate out the dominant takeovers, where the champs just leave absolutely no doubt, from the heartbreakingly close finishes, where gold decided in the blink of an eye. It really proves just how razor-thin the line between glory and failure actually is. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the very first signs of trouble, then we'll move to those razor-thin margins. After that, we'll ride the biggest upset wave of the games, witness the final collapses, and then we'll finish with a really practical tool that you can use when all the pressure is on you. Okay, let's dive right in. The pressure, it really started to show around day 7. And what's interesting is it wasn't about physical error just yet. Nope. This was about the outside world creating total, internal, mental chaos for the best athletes on the planet. Okay, so when your favorite, snowboarder is always Saraski Senat, your entire day is built on rhythm, a perfect warm-up, a mental script you run over and over. But unexpected weather delays, they just shatter that. All of a sudden, her event wasn't about physical skill anymore. It turned into this brutal, agonizing waiting game. And that's where the mental friction starts, forcing an athlete right out of their flow state and into a nasty loop of just overthinking. So then day 8 rolls around, and those little mental cracks, they widen into full-blown collapses. In the skeleton, the Dutch world-class star Kimberly Bos finished a shocking 13th. And look, this wasn't a near miss. It was a complete technical breakdown. She just could not find the feeling, the rhythm of the track. Then, a few hours later in the cross-country relay, a disastrous fall from Sweden's Ebba Andersson completely derailed her team's shot at a medal. And that right there, that's the delay trap in action. It's that weird moment when your own preparation becomes a cage. You are so primed, so ready for a specific moment that any tiny change to the plan just shatters your mental state. And it replaces that automatic, fluid execution with this anxious, corrosive waiting. But hey, not every single favorite buckled. Jakara Anthony in the women's dual moguls, she showed us what handling that pressure looks like. She took home the gold by just 0.56 points. In a sport that's a game of inches, she held her nerve while everyone else was crashing out. It just proves that favorites can deliver, but man, the margin for error is basically 0. So we've seen how favorites can either totally crumble under pressure or just barely hang on. But as we move into days 9 and 10, the gap between success and failure, well, it got even more extreme. We saw either absolute, untouchable dominance or just pure, gut-wrenching agony decided by millimeters. And this slide right here perfectly illustrates those two paths. On the left, you've got a dominant takeover. That's Femke Koch in the 500-meter speed skate. She didn't just win, she set a new Olympic record. It was a closed-book race. Nobody was touching her. But on the right, you see a closed finish that went the wrong way. Laura Nolte led the monobob for 3 straight runs, only to lose gold in the final agonizing moments.
And while some favorites were wrestling with all that pressure, others were using it as fuel. Italy's Lisa Vitazzi started the biathlon pursuit a massive 41 seconds behind. But as the favorites in front of her started missing their shots, you could tell they were succumbing to the pressure. Vitazzi, she was a machine. She did not miss a single target. It was honestly one of the most incredible comeback golds of the entire games.
And this number just brilliantly illustrates the heartbreak. 0.07 seconds. It's literally less time than it takes you to blink. And that was the tiny gap that separated Laura Nolte from a gold medal. She didn't lose because she was slow. She lost because of one tiny skid, one momentary lapse in what was an otherwise perfect performance. For some favorites, the fight is over before it even really begins. Snowboarder Mathilde Gremaud, a huge contender for the Big Air title, had to withdraw after a brutal crash in practice. It's just a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest pressure isn't in the final run, but in just trying to get there in one piece. So as we headed into days 11 and 12, the pressure just kept getting more and more intense. This wasn't just a few individual stumbles anymore, no. This was a full-blown wave of upsets, and it all culminated on day 12, a day we're now calling the Bitter Wednesday for top-seeded athletes. But first, let's look at a team that got it exactly right. On day 11, Canada's women's team pursuit squad put on an absolute clinic. This is what tactical dominance looks like. They defended their Olympic gold not with some desperate last-second burst, but with superior, suffocating pace from the first lap to the last. They basically just slammed the door shut on any possibility of an upset. And then came day 12, and it was a total bloodbath for the favorites. Miho Takagi, the untouchable world record holder in the 1,500-meter speed skate, finished 6th. Figure skating gold favorite Kaori Sakamoto had to settle for a deeply emotional silver medal. And the legend, Brittany Bowe, in her final Olympic race, missed the podium by less than a second. It was just one heartbreak after another. Let's just focus on this for a second. 6th place. For Miho Takagi, an athlete who has literally redefined her sport, this result wasn't just a loss, it was the upset of the entire tournament. It just proves on the Olympic stage all your past records mean absolutely nothing. Okay, so as we reached the final days, the pressure hit its absolute peak. And this led to some of the tightest, most thrilling finishes you could imagine, but also one of the most shocking and complete collapses of the entire Games. Day 13 gave us two perfect opposite examples of how to respond to pressure. In the women's hockey final, we had the classic USA versus Canada showdown, a brutal, down-to-the-wire 2-1 game. That's pressure handled. But in the Nordic combined, we saw pressure cause a total system failure, as the German team went from what looked like a guaranteed gold to completely off the podium. This right here is what a collapse looks like in real time. Germany's Vinzenz Geiger was in a commanding lead, then a small mistake, a first fall. That created pressure. You can almost see the focus break. He seems distracted, and then he falls again. And then a third time, one little mistake cascaded into 3, and a gold medal just evaporated into a 4th place finish. So after all this, what can we really learn from all this chaos? When we look at the whole week, the athletes who managed to stay on top, they all shared a common kind of system for handling pressure. So let's try to distill this down into a practical tool that you can actually use when the spotlight is blinding. We can call this the elite execution audit. First up, the environment check. Think back to Zoe Zadowski-Synot. Are you letting outside factors control your internal state? Second, the single edge focus. In a tight finish, what is the one single detail that matters most? For Laura Nolte, it was the exit of one curve. What's yours? And finally, the reset protocol. This is the Vinzenz Geiger antidote. After a fall, a mistake, do you panic or do you pivot? The audit demands an immediate 5-second physical and mental reset before you even think about continuing. You know, the 2026 Games really showed us that favorites are human. They fall, they miss by milliseconds, and yeah, sometimes they finish 6th. But what this breakdown really reveals is that performance isn't just about winning. It's about how you face the upset, how you handle the fall, and whether you can keep your eyes locked on that next skate.